You're sitting in a room full of people, but you feel completely alone. Someone laughs, someone talks, someone reaches out, and still you don't move. Not because you're shy, not because you're arrogant, but because something inside you quietly says, I've been here before, and it cost me too much. That moment when you choose distance instead of connection is not random. It's the beginning of why empath loners stop trusting people. And I'll explain exactly how that moment forms later. Right now, you might tell yourself a simple story. You say you just prefer your own company. You say people are draining. You say you're tired. All of that is true, but it's not the full truth. There's a deeper reason this pattern shows up in empaths, and once you see it, you won't judge yourself the same way again. I promise we'll come back to that. Here's what most people never understand about you. You didn't start out guarded. You started out open. You gave people your attention, your patience, your emotional presence. You listened between their words. You felt what they couldn't say, and you did it willingly. But over time, something shifted. Not in your heart, but in your nervous system. Silence began to feel safer than explaining yourself. No contact began to feel calmer than hoping someone would finally show up emotionally. And that's confusing because connection is your nature. Pulling back feels like going against who you are. That's why silence feels so hard for you at first. It feels unnatural. It feels like self-betrayal. But it's also powerful because silence stops the constant emotional leaking. When you step into silence, you stop bleeding energy. You stop managing other people's reactions. You stop adjusting yourself to be easier to handle. And for the first time in a long time, your system gets to rest. Silence isn't punishment. Silence is protection. Here's the spine line. Let it land. You didn't stop trusting because you're weak. You stopped trusting because you learned. Chasing connection is what slowly broke that trust in the first place. Every time you chased clarity from someone inconsistent, your position dropped a little. Not because you were wrong to care, but because care without boundaries teaches people how little effort is required to keep you around. When you chase, you tell the other person that your need is greater than your self-respect. And empaths feel that imbalance deeply even if they can't put words to it. You noticed it in your body before you noticed it in your mind. Tightness in your chest, a sense of overthinking, that familiar feeling of waiting for a reply, waiting for reassurance, waiting for proof that you mattered as much as you felt. Over time, your system learned something important. Reaching out doesn't always bring closeness. Sometimes it brings more distance, so you adapted. Empath loners don't wake up one day and decide to stop trusting people. It happens after repeated emotional disappointment. After being the one who understands, forgives, explains, and stays. After realizing that your depth is often met with surface-level effort. Trust erodes not because people are evil, but because they are often unaware, inconsistent, or emotionally unavailable. And inconsistency is brutal for someone like you. You don't need perfection, you need sincerity. When words and actions don't align, your nervous system goes into alert. You start scanning instead of relaxing. You start protecting instead of opening. That's when solitude begins to feel like relief instead of loneliness. Here's the spine line again. You didn't stop trusting because you're weak. You stopped trusting because you learned. There's another layer here, and this is where curiosity matters. Empath loners often don't trust because they trusted too early, too deeply, without enough evidence. They assumed others valued emotional truth the same way they did. I'll explain later why empaths are wired to do that and how it shapes your relationships from the beginning. When trust is broken for you, it's rarely loud. It's quiet. It's the missed follow-up, the subtle dismissal, the way your feelings are acknowledged but not acted on. And because you feel things so deeply, these moments accumulate. Your body remembers them even when your mind tries to rationalize them away. So you start choosing space. You become selective. You stop sharing everything. You observe. You listen more than you speak. And people may call you distant, mysterious, or closed off. But what you really are is discerning. No contact feels powerful because it restores balance. It removes you from dynamics where you were overgiving. It brings your energy back home. And that's why, even though silence feels uncomfortable at first, it eventually feels grounding. Like standing on solid ground again. You are not antisocial. You are anti-self-betrayal. You don't fear people. You fear repeating patterns that taught you to abandon yourself. There is a reason empath loners often feel misunderstood, and there is a reason they become incredibly strong once they understand this pattern. In the next part, we're going to talk about what actually changes psychologically when you step back, what happens in other people's minds when you stop being endlessly available, and how to handle the pull to reconnect before it's truly safe. For now, know this. Your withdrawal is not a flaw, it's a signal, and it's pointing you towards something you haven't fully seen yet. When you step back, something important happens inside you before it happens in anyone else. Your nervous system begins to recalibrate. For a long time, it learned to stay alert, to anticipate moods, to read between lines. Stepping back interrupts that pattern. It creates a pause where your body can finally ask, what do I feel when I'm not reacting to someone else? This is the real psychology of stepping back. It's not about manipulation, it's about regulation. When you remove yourself from the push and pull, your system slowly exits survival mode. You start sleeping differently, thinking differently, breathing differently. And as that happens, clarity returns. You begin to see situations as they are, not as you hoped they would be. That's why stepping back feels so uncomfortable at first. Your system is addicted to engagement, even when engagement hurts. The brain prefers the familiar over the healthy. Chasing, checking, explaining, hoping, these become habits. When you stop, your body protests. It sends urges. It sends anxiety. It tells you something is wrong. But nothing is wrong. Something is changing. Here's the spine line again. You didn't stop trusting because you're weak. You stopped trusting because you learned. Now let's talk about what changes in their mind when you stop reaching out. This part matters because many empaths believe silence makes them invisible. In reality, silence often makes you more noticeable. When you were always available, your presence was predictable. Predictability feels safe, but it also becomes background noise. When you step back, the pattern breaks. They start to feel the absence of what you provided emotionally, the listening, the understanding, the emotional labor. And because you didn't announce your withdrawal, it creates cognitive dissonance. Their mind begins asking questions. Did I misjudge them? Did I take them for granted? Why are they quiet now? This isn't about making someone panic. It's about allowing reality to surface. Silence removes the cushion. It reveals who notices, who reflects, and who simply moves on. And that information is valuable. If someone truly valued you, your absence creates space for reflection. They may become more aware of their behavior. They may feel discomfort. Growth often starts there. If someone only valued what you gave, not who you are, your silence barely registers. And that too is clarity. Here's the spine line again. You didn't stop trusting because you're weak. You stopped trusting because you learned. Now let's be practical, because knowing this doesn't magically erase the urge to text or call. That urge is real. It lives in your body, not just your thoughts. When it hits, it feels urgent, like relief is one message away. But relief through contact is usually temporary. It often resets the cycle instead of healing it. When the urge comes, don't argue with it. Pause. Name it. Say, this is my nervous system seeking familiarity, not truth. Then give your body a different outlet. Change your physical state. Stand up. Walk. Splash cold water on your face. Breathe slowly. Longer exhales than inhales. This tells your body it's safe without external reassurance. Another practical step is to delay, not decide. Tell yourself you'll wait 24 hours before reaching out. Most urges peak and fall like waves. If you don't act at the peak, clarity usually returns. Write what you want to say in a note you won't send. Often, just expressing it releases the pressure. And ask yourself one grounding question. If I reach out right now, am I honoring my self-respect or soothing my anxiety? The answer is usually clear, even if it's uncomfortable. Here's the spine line again. You didn't stop trusting because you're weak. You stopped trusting because you learned. So what should you focus on daily instead of chasing? This is where empath loners rebuild trust, not with others, but with themselves. Start with routines that anchor you in your body. Consistent sleep, nourishing food, movement that feels supportive, not punishing. When your body feels stable, your emotional world follows. Focus on creating instead of reacting. Journal, learn. Build something small that belongs only to you. Your mind needs evidence that your life expands when you're not orbiting someone else. Each day you invest energy inward, you reclaim a piece of yourself that was outsourced to connection. Also pay attention to your standards, not what you say you want, but what you tolerate. When you stop chasing, you see patterns more clearly. You notice who reaches out with intention and who disappears when effort is required. This isn't about judgment, it's about discernment. Empath loners often believe they're hard to love. In truth, they are simply incompatible with shallow dynamics. Stepping back isn't closing your heart, it's protecting it until it's met with consistency. There's something else happening quietly when you stop chasing. Your identity begins to shift. You stop seeing yourself as the one who waits. You become the one who chooses. That shift is subtle but powerful. It changes how you walk into rooms, how you speak, how you listen. And that's why this phase feels lonely before it feels liberating. You're shedding an old role. Roles don't leave without resistance. But on the other side of this discomfort is a version of you that trusts her own signals. In the next part, we'll talk about what happens when people come back after you step away and what to do if they never do. Because silence always reveals truth, one way or another. If they come back, this is where many empaths lose themselves again. Not because they don't know better, but because hope speaks softly and boundaries feel loud. When someone returns after silence, your job is not to reward their absence with instant access. Your job is to stay steady, calm, observant. You don't rush to explain. You don't rush to reconnect. You let behavior speak before words do. If they come back, you slow the pace. Not to punish them, but to protect yourself. You notice if their actions match their promises. You notice consistency over time, not intensity in a moment. You hold your standards quietly. Standards are not ultimatums. They are how you live. You don't argue for them. You embody them. Boundaries here are simple. You don't over-explain. You don't resume emotional labor before trust is rebuilt. You allow space for them to meet you where you are now, not where you used to be. If they respect that space, something new can form. If they push against it, that tells you everything you need to know. This is where the spine line matters again. You didn't stop trusting because you're weak. You stopped trusting because you learned. Now let's talk about the other path. What if they don't come back? This is the part many people fear the most, but it's also where dignity is born. If they don't return, silence has still done its job. It has revealed truth. Not about your worth, but about their capacity. Closure doesn't always come from a conversation. Often it comes from acceptance. Acceptance that you showed up fully. Acceptance that you gave chances. Acceptance that you didn't abandon yourself in the end. Closure is an internal decision to stop waiting for someone to become who they are not. Moving forward with dignity means you don't rewrite history to make the loss hurt less. You don't romanticize what was inconsistent. You honor what you felt without letting it define your future. You take the lesson without carrying the wound. And here's something important. When someone doesn't come back, it's not a failure of silence. It's proof that silence protected you from more of the same. You didn't lose them. You were released. The spine line belongs here too. You didn't stop trusting because you're weak. You stopped trusting because you learned. Silence reveals truth either way. If they return with humility, patience, and effort, silence showed you what's possible. If they disappear, silence showed you what was never there to begin with. Both outcomes serve you, even if one hurts more at first. Let's move quickly through a summary, because clarity loves simplicity. Stepping back regulated your nervous system. Silence broke old patterns. Chasing lowered your position while restraint restored it. When you stopped reaching out, you learned who noticed, who reflected, and who moved on. If they came back, you learned how to hold boundaries. If they didn't, you learned how to let go with dignity. Here's one clear action step to anchor all of this. Commit to a non-negotiable pause the next time you feel the urge to chase. Not forever, just a pause. 24 hours. In that pause, do one thing that strengthens your body, your mind. Walk, write, breathe, sleep. That single pause is where self-trust begins to rebuild. You are not cold for stepping back. You are not difficult for having standards. You are not broken for learning from pain. You are becoming precise, calm, self-respecting. There's a version of you that no longer confuses longing with connection. That version doesn't chase, she chooses. She listens to silence. She lets truth reveal itself without forcing an answer. And if this resonated with you, watch the next video where we talk about how empaths rebuild trust without closing their hearts.